first passenger. And there is the founder of the Cherry Blossom Festival, Reverend Nicholas Inman.
I do apologize. I got stuck in the T traffic. And I was insistent that I introduce this program today. So, the 20th anniversary of the Cherry Blossom Festival is very momentous. And in celebrating our 20th anniversary, it was very important, to me anyways, that we bring back nuggets of our history, special moments that have really resonated with the hearts of us Cherry Festers. And one of those special moments I'm kind of proud of and a little partial about. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she said to me one day, "Daddy, I really think that John Boy should visit Marshfield." Well, you know, as a parent, of course you want your daughter to be in love with John Boy and not Justin Bieber or something, you know. So I said, "I think that's a great idea. What do you have in mind?" And she said, "Well, I've made this sign," and it said, something, Richard Thomas or John Boy, I think it said John Boy, "Please come to Marshfield." So we took a picture of that, and many of you in this room shared that, and it kind of went all over the internet. And it wasn't long after that Mo Rocca from CBS Sunday Morning reached out. Anybody a fan of CBS Sunday Morning? And they wanted to do a story about the Cherry Blossom Festival. So I said, "Well, we'll make a deal. Do you know Richard Thomas?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, if you can help arrange for my daughter to speak to Richard Thomas on the phone to personally invite him to Marshfield, we'll agree that you can come and do the story." And so one day we were in the dry cleaners in Marshfield, and the phone rang. And of course, if you're a fan of the Waltons, you certainly are acquainted with the voice of Richard Thomas. And he asked if Reagan was there, and I put her on the phone. And everybody in the dry cleaners, because we're a small town, everybody knew the story of Reagan working to get John Boy here. And all she would do is stand there and say, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh." And when she got off the phone, I said, "What did he say?" "I have no idea," she said. But what I learned later, what he actually had promised was, and he explained that he could not visit Marshfield that particular year, but he made a commitment that he would. And Richard Thomas is a man of his word, because I think when she was about in the 5th grade, he did come to Marshfield. He went and read to her 5th grade class as promised. And so, you know, when you meet somebody that you've watched on television, sometimes it can be a terrible experience and you can really have a letdown. But it was not the case with Richard Thomas. And so Richard has a pretty special place in the heart of the Inman family. And I'm glad that as my daughter's now going to be 17, that she's still in love with John Boy. And I know I don't have to explain to this audience why Richard Thomas is important and an iconic piece of our history of pop culture, right? So I'd like to introduce to the stage two special people. Our moderator, my daughter Reagan Inman, and Mr. Richard Thomas, if you'd make them welcome. Good luck.
How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Yes.
Good.
Great to see you.
You too.
Hey, everybody.
Well, thank you, Dad, and thank you, everybody, for coming. The man next to me needs no introduction because he was all of our older brothers. He was all of our family member, and we all said goodnight to him at one time, didn't we? Yeah. So, you have led such an incredible life, and I think the best way to just dig it all apart is to start at the very beginning.
Sure.
So, you grew up in an entertainer family.
I did.
What was that like?
Well, it was wonderful. I was the only family I had, so I had nothing to compare it with. But yeah, I was born and raised in New York City, Manhattan. I'm an island boy. And my mother and father were ballet dancers. And they danced with many different companies, including the Balanchine Company, when they lived in New York. And I was sort of a backstage baby. And that was the world I grew up in. And then when I was 6, I guess, my first grade teacher happened to be a children's agent. And I had done some I did some summer stock with that summer after my first grade with some other kids. My dad was dancing up there, and did a couple musicals, and I had small parts. Got home, and then this first grade teacher took me to audition for my first Broadway show, which was in 1958, a play about the Roosevelt family called Sunrise at Campobello. So I was 8, and that was how it, and then they haven't let me stop. So I'm still doing it.
So how did you go from Broadway to your first films?
Well, in those days, when dinosaurs walked the earth, most television was done in New York. It was the 50s, it was late 50s, it was live TV, a lot of it shot in Brooklyn, the big studios there, NBC studios there. So I auditioned for a Hallmark Christmas show and got that job, and I just became a young New York actor who worked all the time. Then years after that, when I was turning 17, I went to Hollywood and screen tested with Joanne Woodward to play her son in a movie at Universal called Winning, which she and Paul Newman starred in. And they were my first movie parents. And so it's just, it's been a lovely path and a very lucky, a very fortunate one for me. And, when you have no skills, you keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that's what I do.
So our favorite role in the room, I'm going to take the liberty and say, is John Boy. So why don't you tell us about the audition process for getting John Boy?
Oh, well, I didn't actually audition for John Boy, I'm happy to say. Earl Hamner had seen a movie I did also at Universal called Red Sky at Morning, based on a novel by Richard Bradford, and he had seen me in this picture and had told Fielder Cook, the director, and the producers of The Homecoming, which was the Christmas special that the Waltons, we didn't have a pilot, we had this Christmas special, and everybody loved it so much that they decided at CBS to turn it into a series. But he requested me for the part, so I just got the offer for it and read it, and it was just a gorgeous script and a gorgeous part, and I got to work with Pat Neal, but I also got to meet at that time my second family. I don't know how many of you are here, if anybody's here right now if we got any Waltons in the crowd. But, hi.
Cammie back there.
Hi, Rena.
Everybody
hey,
wave at Cammie.
Hi, Rena. How
And
you doing?
Reen, hi.
Cammie, you got a Christmas ornament. You got a Christmas ornament. I'm jealous. Right, okay. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. So we did the Homecoming together, and it was a one-off thing, and it was turned into a series, and some of us, me included, because I was making pictures at the time, we were a little reticent about doing a series week after week. So they sent scripts, and the scripts were so good, and the part was so beautiful that it would have been crazy not to do it, and so that's how that started.
So when you read for the part, were you like, I love this boy, I want to become him? Because when we talk to you now, it's like we're talking right to John Boy Walton.
Sure.
So did you shape him, or did he shape you?
Well, both. That's a great question, Reagan. And when you're playing a part, both things happen. It's a kind of an alchemy where you have the role as it is on paper, and then you have what you bring. You have you, and then you put them together, and a third thing happens. And this sort of hybrid is created, and sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great. But it's really the sensibilities of the character, and then because all you can really ever do is bring your presence to the work. You're always just going to be you, no matter what you do, costume-wise, accent-wise, all that. So you bring yourself as authentically as possible as you can to what the writer has written, and then this other sort of half real, half fictional person arises. And it's wonderful when you do theater because different people play the same parts over time. So if you've seen in classics, if you've seen an actor play one role and then several years later you see another actor play the same role, you have the experience of how, well, it's similar, but it's an extremely different thing, a different being. And that's part of the beauty of the experience of acting. But it does affect you. I mean, what's on the page affects you.
Did John Boy ever do anything that you didn't want him to do?
Did he ever do things I didn't want him
Yeah.
to do? That's a great question. Well, I mean, in the gag reels, maybe, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think that I sort of kept a firm hand on him, and
Yeah.
and if he was going to do something I didn't want him to do, he'd do it my way. No.
So how was getting to work with Earl Hamner?
Well, Earl was amazing, as we all know. He was our father for the show. He not only was a wonderful writer and a wonderful and hilariously funny man. If for those who didn't know him, he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he was really his constant presence and the light that he shone on all of us, whether he had written the script or had worked on the script that someone else had written, he made sure, and we knew that it was always going to be that show that we originally made, and he kept us honest, and he kept giving us good things to play, and he was very generous too, because we would get together and do readings of the script the week before we would shoot the episode, and then he would take suggestions, and not always, but sometimes he would incorporate those into the script, and so we felt he made us feel that we were great contributors and collaborators in creating our roles and creating the show for everybody. But Earl's presence was, the two things were really Earl's presence and what he brought to every part of it, and then the extraordinary chemistry and the beauty of the family that we created when we all came together. And the authenticity of the affection and fun that we had.
Did you have a certain episode that was your favorite for shooting, or the message, or anything like that?
I got a lot of kids, and it's a different favorite every day, depending on how everybody's behaving. It's like, so I don't know that I actually had a favorite show. I mean, if I had to pick one, I'd say, okay, the one that I got the Emmy for, which was the Love Story show, I would pick that. I would select that because it brought me such good fortune. But I can't honestly say that there was one particular episode that I would hold above the others. I mean, some were better than others, obviously, because you don't have 4 aces every time, but an amazing amount of them were really good and satisfying. So I don't choose favorites. It's always been hard for me to do that.
One of the greatest things about the Waltons episodes as viewers was they always had a message behind them. And I always think about like the book burning episode. Mm-hmm. So what was it like to have that platform of talking about more serious topics as well as having a fun show?
Well, it was wonderful that we were able to tell stories that had a sort of I hate to use the word lesson, because we weren't, there was nothing prescriptive about it. We weren't sort of telling people, this is how you have to behave. This is what's good, this is what's bad, this is, it wasn't, we weren't doing morality plays. We were just doing plays about people and how people are connected and the things that people need to do to stay connected and support and love each other, and the meanings of community and family and all that. But it was never about, this is how you be a good person and this is how you. But it felt wonderful to tell stories that you could call them issues, like the book burning, you know, which was an extremely satisfying and I thought very successful episode. John Ritter was particularly wonderful in that episode, I thought. But we never tried to, I mean, I'm sure we didn't always succeed, but our goal was never to hit the nail on the head, you know, to have a show that was about an issue. You know, we had a show about a Jewish family that came, and the kids learned about what that was and what it was like to be in a Jewish family. There were wonderful stories about people who were ill or who were, you know, to bring forth the human element. The empathetic quality of the shows was what was important. But it never felt, it always felt that there was something to say in a human way that was worth saying. And when you have a show that's not just about the message, but that's about the people living with the issue, then the relationship with the actors can deepen because you have an opportunity to play with each other in a very authentically emotional way and in a deeper way and in a more passionate way. And when you can do that, those relationships come across, and they come across to the audience. And that's contagious, that feeling of people loving each other and being together and playing sincerely with each other. But in order to do that, you have to, the words have to be on the page, and the subject has to be, I don't like to use the word important, but it has to be deep enough and human enough to motivate that kind of work.
And it did, right?
That's a really
all of us
long
felt
answer.
those things, right? So still thinking back to your early acting career, who was somebody that influenced you even to now,
Right.
in a good way,
Right.
and in a bad way?
Well, you know, when you're a child actor and you're fortunate enough to work a lot, you're always working with people who have experience. You're usually playing somebody's kid, right? Yeah. And I had wonderful parents, wonderful, you know, fictional theater and movie and television parents. I mean, I would start with Michael and Ralph because that was the longest and deepest relationship I ever had with any, you know, collegial parents. But by that time I was in my 20s. Paul and Joanne were in my first movie, were very influential. And their connection to the Actors Studio in New York and the Lee Strasberg style and all that, which was very important when I was growing up. That was very influential. Geraldine Page, who I worked with, who was one of our greatest actresses, who I worked with as a small boy, like 10, 11, on Broadway, was a great example because of her absolute, utter and complete commitment to truth, you know, on the stage. Or Michael and Ralph equally were committed to being truthful. You know, Ralph was very, you know, he wanted it authentic. If it didn't smell right, he'd do it again. You know, if he didn't feel that the truth was being told, you know, he would just say, we got to do this again, or that doesn't feel right. Michael also, you know, very low tolerance for something that didn't feel real. I mean, you can't hit it all the time, but their authenticity and their integrity was impeccable when we were working together in front of the camera. But you have lots of parents, you know. I mean, every now and then you get, you know, I remember when I was a small boy, I was doing I think it was the second show I ever did on television. It was another Hallmark show. It was an Easter show called Give Us Barabbas, and I played a street urchin. I had a lovely little part in it. But we were doing a scene with the crowd, and then there was the actor who was an older British man who was playing Pontius Pilate. He kept forgetting his lines, right? And at one point he stopped and he said, I just can't remember. I can't remember my lines. That boy over there, he's distracting me, you know. And so it was like really embarrassing and horrible, and I was really embarrassed and hadn't been distracting him. I was just small and cute, you know. You know. I don't know. But maybe that was distracting for him. But afterwards, the director came up and apologized and made it right. And he was a wonderful director named George Schaefer, who directed a lot of the live shows in those days. So mostly people are terrific, and mostly people are lovely to you when you're a child, if you're not being a pain in the neck, you know, if you're behaving. Yeah. And we always behaved, didn't we, Cammie? We were so good, weren't we good? Yeah, we were so good. They had to separate me and John Ritter all the time. We were like two kids in class who had to be separated and kept in different rows because we were so naughty. But anyway, that's another story.
So a lot of us viewers forget that the kids that we're watching on television are actual real-life kids. So what was it like balancing school and being on set all the time?
Well, I felt for everybody who had to do that. When I was a boy, in living in New York, acting as a young actor in New York, they didn't have any of those laws. You didn't do school on the set. You just came to work. You worked as long a day as everybody else, and you had to do your homework at some point, and you'd miss school, and then you'd have to make it up. And so they didn't. There were no real child labor laws in New York when I was coming up. In fact, the first time I went out to LA, I did a series when I was a small kid called 1, 2, 3, Go, which was a children's show where I went off and did wonderful things that would be interesting to kids, you know. And we went to LA and we went out to Marineland, it was called at the time. We went out and looked at pilot whales. It was all about that. Anyway, that was the first time I encountered these rules where I could only work 4 hours, which really made me mad because I felt like they were pulling me off the set and it was kind of embarrassing. You know, I had a teacher, which was really annoying. It was very strange. I felt managed in a way that I never felt before because as a kid in New York, as a child actor, you were just in the room with the company. And if you had a break or you weren't working, you did your homework. But strangely enough, I always did better in school when I was working than when I was there full time. Maybe because I was more stimulated when I was doing a job than when I was just being a student.
So the whole nation knew you as John Boy.
Yeah.
So then what was it like when you started taking other roles, and how was your fans' feedback on that?
Well, it was wonderful to start taking other roles. You know, it's great. It's refreshing. It's good. You want to do it. You know, I knew that the impact of the show was so great and that all of us had created such indelible characters that we were going to be identified with those characters probably always, which is fine, especially if it's a show that you're proud of being in. I know there are folks who've been in shows that they don't like to talk about them, they don't want you to mention them, and fortunately, I don't think any of us have those feelings. We're very proud of the show and of each other, and we're still a family, and it's so I had very strong feelings of affection for the show, but when you're ready to go and you want to do other parts, which I fortunately never had a hard time doing. I mean, they would frequently not cast me in parts that I wanted to do, but it didn't seem right because they had an idea of me in their head, this sort of typecasting, which people in the business, of course, should know better, but they don't. That would be frustrating, but it didn't happen often enough to be discouraging, you know. And every now and then they'd send a script that would be so on the nose, it would be like, I've already done this like 5 times. I don't want to do it again. But you can't actually expect, just because you've made a change and you've decided you want to do something else and go in another direction, you can't expect everyone else to make that turn with you at the same time. People want you to be who they who they knew you as. They want you to hold on. They want you to still identify with the character they love. And you have to have a certain sensitivity towards it, even though it can be frustrating, it can make you angry, But if you just keep plugging at it, and you eventually, over time, you balance the scales, and you do enough work so that people see other work that you do, and then they remember you as John Boy, but they also remember enjoying you in other things, and that's, it's a lucky person's problem.
So last year I was a sophomore, and I was in an American history class, and I walked into class. I had missed one day, and I walked into class, and there was this voice, and I knew it from somewhere. And I look, and Richard Thomas is on the projector screen in All Quiet on the Western Front. Right. So what is it like still being taught in classrooms now? How is that movie impactful for you?
Well, I fought in several wars. I fought in the Civil War. I fought in the Vietnam War. I fought in World War II. I was in the Navy. Yeah. But my favorite war was the First World War because of that movie. That was a great picture, and I loved the role, and I loved working with Ernest Borgnine, who was in it, and it was very intense, the experience, very satisfying. And one of the most satisfying things about it of all was that it used to, and I think still does, get shown in schools as a supplement to the novel. There's a newer version that came out on Netflix, which is very intense and very, very different from ours. But ours was sort of a recreation, an amplified recreation of the original movie, too, from early 30s, I think. But I love doing that. I love doing that. Again, I got to work with Pat Neal again in that. She played my mother a second time. But I loved All Quiet. I remember when we shot in the trenches. We shot it in Czechoslovakia. We wanted to shoot it in Germany, right? And we called the film department. Told them what we needed, what we were going to do, and they said, "Well, you can't shoot in Germany because we don't have any of those. We don't have those sets for you because you bombed them all." They're not, but if you want the largest sort of amount of pre-First World War architecture that is still intact and still in good shape, you got to go to Czechoslovakia, which we did. And the first thing we did was blow up an 18th century church. I don't know how that happened, but it was abandoned. But I remember we were in the trenches, and it was a very difficult night shoot. It was very late at night or very early in the morning. I can't remember which now. And we'd been doing a rain scene. They'd been doing the rain birds on us. We were wet, and we were cold. We were muddy. And Norman Rosemont, who was the producer, had been back to London for a visit, and he'd come back, right? So he showed up on the set with Delbert Mann, the director, and he stood at the lip of the trench. We were all laying there, and he had a paper sack, and he took out a little thing of peanut butter, because we'd been in Czechoslovakia for weeks. A little thing of peanut butter, and he'd toss it then he'd take out a Snickers bar, and he tossed it into the trench. Then he'd take out a Cadbury bar and toss it into the trench. He turned to the director and he said, "I love to feed the actors." And we were literally piling over each other to get at the candy. Being a producer, he didn't throw money.
So going from the Waltons to war,
Yep.
and then to scary movies, why don't you tell us a little bit about working on it?
It was a blast. No, it just was. I don't like scary movies very much because I get scared. I watch between my fingers like that. So, but they're fun to make. I don't know about the ones that are really gross and gory. I don't know if those are fun to make, but it was really wonderful. And it was mainly wonderful because we all were already friends, most of us. John Ritter and I were pals. John and help me. Our leading lady, Annette O'Toole. Annette and I had done plays together. John and Annette had worked together. Dennis Christopher and I had made a movie together. Richard Mazur had been in the Waltons. It was a wonderful, Harry Anderson, none of us knew, but we knew him immediately because he was so much fun and so easy to get to know. So the feeling, that movie's really not about monsters, it's about friendship. So I think the reason that version, as primitive as it is compared to all the fantastic special effects you can do now, I think that version was special because there, as with all of us on the Waltons, the chemistry was there from the beginning. We were already dear, close friends, and we had so much fun together. And so the connection that you see when you watch the movie is an authentic, real connection between all of us. But I love doing it, you know. I liked my fake ponytail. No, it was a wonderful experience. And I like that people still come up and talk about it. I mean, people still really like that show. And I have to believe that, aside from the fact that it's a great story, I have to believe that part of what they like about it is how we all were together, you know, what the relationships were.
So from that to very recently, your role on Ozark. So that was on Netflix, and
Yeah.
that was a lot different than John Boy.
Oh, yeah.
I hope we have some Ozark fans. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, good, right?
Yeah. And
Oh.
I guess I should say I'm not allowed to watch Ozark, but I'm going off of what my parents have told me about it. So
I'll send you the DVDs.
Okay, sounds good. See, Dad, sorry. Blame Richard.
Yeah, in an unmarked brown paper package. Okay.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
How was that?
Yeah, how was that?
It was so much fun. Well, Ozark is great. It's it's a fabulous show. It's a rough show. It's a tough show. You know, not easy. It's like a Jacobean tragedy where, you know, everybody ends up dead practically. And it's also kind of funny in a strange, creepy way. Wonderful cast. I was invited to do Ozark by, really, I know it was because of Laura Linney, because a few years prior to that, I had played her husband on Broadway in a production of The Little Foxes. And she's a wonderful woman and a wonderful colleague, just great, just terrific. And so they called, and she called and said, please say yes, please say yes, please say yes, to play her dad. Like 4 years after I played her husband. An older husband, but nevertheless. So I would have had to have been about 14 when I had her, I guess, or 15, I'm not sure. And I said, Laura, have you seen me lately? Have I aged that much in the last 4 or 5 years that I can play your dad now? But I did. It was a great part. I loved it. I loved it. You know, those guys are fun to play. Those parts are so much fun. I mean, they're, you know, the nice guys are fun to play, but bad guys are delicious. They really are. And I love doing it. And that whole company was great. I had a wonderful time. Julia Garner, wonderful. Just a wonderful bunch. And I actually did look like her father. With a little help from the makeup department. You know, they wouldn't have to put as many spots on me now as they did then, but.
So you started out on stage, you went to screen, and then you've gone back to stage quite recently.
Yeah.
You just finished as Atticus on To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I actually went and saw him at the Fox Theater in St. Louis, and that was really cool. So why don't you tell us a little bit about touring as Atticus?
Well, I want to start by saying the fabulous Fox Theater in St. Louis is one of the great places you can play as an actor. It is absolutely the most fantastic theater. It's huge, you know, and it's really not built for a play, although our play was big. We had 24 actors, which is a lot. For a play, there are usually musicals there, but we filled it up, which was amazing. And backstage too, there are three. I haven't played the one in Detroit, but I have played the one in Atlanta, which is another great, great, great Fox Theater. And we loved playing the Fox. And that was a great experience. I mean, the theater, I've been doing theater pretty much all along. There have been a couple of years here and there when I didn't do any, but I mean, even when I was doing the Waltons, there were a couple of times where I'd take, on my hiatus, I'd do something. But it's been great to come back. That was a wonderful tour. We were all over the country. I love touring. I'm a road rat. I've done we did 12 Angry Men, which toured. We did The Humans, which is a wonderful play that toured. And then we did 2.5 years of Mockingbird. And the road is a great experience. It's wonderful to do Broadway. There's nothing quite like it. It's great to do off-Broadway. It's great to be working in London, which I've done. It's great, wonderful things. But there's something very, very special and unique about traveling all over the country to all the different theaters and all the different communities where people are so proud of their local theater, and where they don't have to, they're not seeing you as tourists in New York. You're coming to them, and all the different flavors of different communities and states. Different audiences in different parts of the country have very different personalities, and it's a wonderful thing to do. In fact, starting in August, I'm going to start taking out on the road in different cities a revival of a wonderful show that Hal Holbrook did years ago called Mark Twain Tonight. We'll start in Hartford, Connecticut, where the Twain House is, and then I'll just keep doing it around the country for a while. But the road is great. It's a wonderful thing. And a lot of actors are worried, don't like to do it because it takes them out of New York. But like I say, New York doesn't care about you. It'll be there when you get back. And people love it when you come and play in their hometown. It's a very special connection.
So out of your entire career, on stage, off stage, on the screen, on wherever you were, what is one moment, one memory that has impacted you for the rest of your life?
That what?
That has impacted you for the rest of your life.
Okay, this is early. This is my first job, right? My first professional job. I was Sunrise at Campobello. So I was a kid. I was 8 years old. It was 1958. I was 7. And put your calculators away. And because some of you are older, I know that. And because I was in school, I could never, and because I wasn't in the last act, I had to go home before the curtain call. So I'd have to go home when I was done and do my homework and get up and go to school and come to the theater in the evening. But the first Friday night, or it might have been a Saturday, that I went to the theater and I didn't have to go home. And I could do the curtain call. And I went out with everybody and held hands with the rest of the company. James Earl Jones, as a matter of fact, was holding my hand because he and I both made our Broadway debuts in that show. And of course, that was the first applause. That was not only satisfying to a very small actor ego, but don't be fooled by the smallness. The ego is still there. This small actor who has been doing this job and doing the job, and then all of a sudden comes out with the rest of the company as himself and witnesses the amazing experience, has the amazing experience of hearing that applause come from the audience. And it's not just, it wasn't fabulous because it made me feel good about myself. That happened later. But because I was aware for the first time that because the audience was participating, and they became real to me, in a completely different way. And the communion between audience and player became real to me in a new way for the first time. And that is the thing about like what we're doing right now, you know. In the age of screens, we get to all be together in the room, right? And once this is over, except I know you're taking pictures of it, but which is cool. But once this is over, it's done, right? We disperse. We've had an experience, but we've all been together having the experience, all of us. And that was the first time I really was aware of that connection with an audience. And the other time was a few very short years, maybe a couple of years after that, when I was doing a play in Summerstock a wonderful play called Remember the Wedding. And I was sitting on the stage at the end of the first act, and the lights were low, and I sat there and I said to myself, you're an actor. I'd been doing stuff, but it hit me in a different way. I thought, this is what you do. This is who you are. Richard, you're an actor, and that this is your life. And so those were really, I mean, I've had a lot of wonderful experiences and that have impacted me. But those two were very formative in ways that were different.
Well, I just want to let you know that as that
And
little...
of course, sitting next to Cammie at the dinner table.
Well, of course. I just want to let you know that you have made that little 6-year-old's dreams come true today. This is an incredible experience, and you have really impacted my life, and you have impacted all of these people's lives, and so many more.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
So I have asked all of my questions, so if we want to open it up to the crowd, we'll do
Sure.
a few Q&A. If we can get Richard on the mic. Yeah.
Great job, by the way.
Richard, could you share a couple iconic stories about Will Geer and Ellen Corby?
I could share a couple stories about Will Geer. And there's some that I won't. Well, Will, you know, I mean, Will was a one-off. I mean, all the great character players, and Ellen too, are one-offs. They are hired, and the history of Hollywood and theater is filled with these extraordinary people. Sometimes it was because of the voice, sometimes it was because of the face, sometimes it was because of the humor or the manner. But the art of the character actor is one of the most wonderful things about our business. And so when you have someone like Will, like Ellen, they are one-offs, they are not like anyone else, they don't sound like anyone else, they don't look like anyone else. And Will was that way on screen, but very much that way off screen as well, right? He would come and sit. He would come and sit on the set outside in front of the house in his chair, and he'd have a sack with wildflower seeds, and while he'd talk to you, he'd just be throwing seeds, he'd be planting. You know, he planted Shakespeare gardens around the country in different places. And so he was totally a man of nature, and in that he was kind of a wild man in a wonderful way. He was loving, he was fun, he was great. What I learned from Will, because Will had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era, right? Because, I mean, his folks were Reds, I mean, real Reds. And he was very proud of that. But during the McCarthy era, he was blacklisted, along with a lot of other actors, and was not allowed to work. he had a, what would you call it, came in L.A.? You know, it was like the cottages. It was like a little, yeah, right. And I mean, he had people, other actors who had been blacklisted. He had people like Woody Guthrie, people who would come and stay with him, and he'd take care of them, and he'd look after them. And he provided a safe haven for people who were going through that horrible, horrible, horrible Red Scare period. And one of the thing that I learned from Will, many things, but the word he used, gusto, was a word he used a lot. You know, when I would be, in the wisdom of a 21-year-old egomaniac television star, annoyed with something, or pissed off, or kind of like feeling bored over the, I would look at Will and I would see the fervor and the joy and the pleasure that he took in being able to work after having been forbidden to work by all those terrible people. And so the appreciation he had for work was always a tonic and a corrective for me whenever I felt like I was getting spoiled, or that kind of thing. So that was very, very important to me, that lesson, because of his appreciation at being able to create that beautiful, beautiful role, which a couple of decades prior to that, he would not have been allowed to do. I did go to his compound the first time, and he was showing me around, and in one of the garden areas, there was a large double bed outside. And I said, Will, do you sleep on this bed outside? And he said, yes, it's a habit I picked up from my second common law wife. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Next question.
First of all, us that know and love Reagan, you've done a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you so much.
Second, I want to be the first to say good night, John Boy.
Good night. You're getting your exercise.
Hi, I'm just thinking about my own career, and early on there's so many things that are fundamental that I always retain, and there's other things that I could barely remember. When you look back at, say, like your earlier career, some of those long roles like John Boy, can you just whip out lines and things that you remember and get into character, or do you, like the rest of us, have to polish up and study in order to get back into that?
Great. I have great hearing aids, but could you repeat that?
Are you able to remember things like lines and different parts of your parts as a younger actor?
Later on?
Yeah, now.
Now?
Can you just pull out a John Boy line anytime you
Well,
want?
to be or not to be, but I mean, we all know that one. Learning is every now and then things will come back to me, lines, but not so much. It's when you're learning a text, it's easier when you've done a play for a couple of years. There are a lot of things that stick with you. But when you learn a text, it's a different kind of learning, and it's a different kind of memory. You're learning fast, and you're learning, you're jamming it in, and you're learning it. And if you're doing it in front of the camera, if it's a scene during a day's shoot, you'll spend a couple hours on it, and maybe a few hours if it's a complicated scene, but it's not that much. So you're learning fast, and you learn it, but what goes in fast sometimes goes out fast, right? So it's a sort of situational kind of memory. It doesn't stay with you, I mean, now, nothing stays with me, but it's great, it's wonderful. A friend of mine said, how are you doing? I said, well, I've been having a little trouble with my short-term memory, and I've been having a little trouble with my long-term memory. And I've been having a little trouble with my short-term memory. But it's a different kind of memorization. But if you've been in a show and you've done it for years, then lines will stay with you and come back.
Richard, again, I want to join the others in saying thank you for how much the Waltons has influenced our lives. And thank you for sharing your bedroom. We got to stay at John and Olivia's house. Yeah, it was really neat.
Wonderful, yeah. Isn't that great? Yeah. You mean in Schuyler?
It was really
yeah.
neat.
Oh, that's great.
The bed was way too hard, though, so
yeah.
you couldn't do anything about that. But have you been back to, I think you were at Schuyler for one of the reunions?
I've been there, but it's been several years. Yeah. It's been several years since I was there.
All right, well, thank you again.
It was wonderful. It's wonderful to go there.
Richard, I know you played in a couple movies. One of them you played Paul Ingalls on A Little House on the Prairie, Beyond Prairie 2.
When you played Pa Ingalls,
yeah.
Can you just tell a little bit
what
about that?
It? Oh, I love that part.
And a second one is, how did you go from John Boy to Hank Williams Jr.?
How'd you go to John Boy from Hank Williams Jr.? So you got two questions.
I was one of the executive producers on that show, and I got my first phone conversation with Hank, and he knew he was talking to one of the producers. We were talking on the phone and this and that, and then he says, they got this John Boy playing me, and I said, yeah, Hank, that's me. Well, I mean, totally different characters, right? I mean, great fun, and I had to, again, talk about situational learning. I had to learn to chord. I don't play guitar. I had to learn to play these songs. Couldn't do it again to save my life. Maybe to save my life, but it's that sort of, so I had to learn a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm very shy about my singing voice. I don't even do it in the shower, so. And there were a couple of songs where I had to sing. So that was a little traumatic, but I loved doing that show.
Reagan, I'm so jealous, but my favorite role is being a grandma. I want to know if you're a grandpa.
Was which?
Are you a grandpa?
Are you a grandpa?
I'm a grandpa 4 times, yes.
Oh, wow.
I am.
And you have quite a few children. How many do you have?
How many kids do I have?
Yeah.
7.
So he is the
Not
Walton
on
family.
purpose. Not on purpose. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a plan. It worked out that way, and it's beautiful. I had 4. My beautiful wife Georgiana had 2. We got married. That made 6. Not content with 6. We had to make one of our own. And I'm glad we did. And so we have 7. But they're all somebody else's problem now.
So Richard, do you guys call it to each other and say goodnight at your house with 7 kids? Do you holler in the bedrooms like you did on the show?
Well, we say goodnight to each other because it would be rude not to, but we don't. No, we don't do that. No. I only do that for money.
I would like to ask about one of my favorite movies, The Christmas Box, and what it was like working with Maureen O'Hara.
Maureen O'Hara was great. She was great. And when she would have a couple of glasses of wine at dinner, that Irish brogue would come out, right, Georgie? And it was so thick and wonderful. She was a great pal, a magnificent movie star, a wonderful woman, and I was in awe. I was so happy that I got to work with Annette, who I love in that show as well. But she was terrific, I mean, our parrot bit her finger because she wouldn't stop poking it into the cage. We told her not to. She says, that bird's bit me in the finger. I said, yeah, Maureen, I told you not to stick your finger in the cage. But I will tell you a story about Maureen. We were taking the plane to Salt Lake City for an event, and it was right after 9/11, and we were getting on the plane, and we were going through security, and they confiscated Maureen O'Hara's cuticle scissors. I mean, I will admit, that a flaming-haired Irish woman, you don't want to get on the wrong side of her, right? But her cuticle scissors. Okay, so that was...
I got to go to Will Geer's property, and he's buried where you mentioned the bed was, or the ashes are, for here.
Sorry, man.
No worries. I was curious if you have ever performed at that theater that he built there on his compound that has the creek going underneath and everything.
You mean the Theatrical Botanicum?
Yeah.
No, I never played there. I've been there, but I've never played there. You know,
Amazing place.
And I think Ellen still run it, or yeah, she does.
All
Ellen
right.
Gear. It's a wonderful thing that they did creating that theater. It was great, and he was doing it while we were working. You know, it was that was him though. I mean, he was not like anyone else, and he created this sort of classical theater company in the wilds of Topanga, you know, with a backhoe and several of his children and his kind of children, and, you know, his wonderful army of people that he had.
All right, well, there's only one way to correctly wrap this up, and I think everybody in the crowd wants to join me in saying it, O.C. Lotta. So if everybody wants to say it at the same time, so we can all say we've said it directly to John Boy Walton. Okay? Okay. Good night, John Boy.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. What a great job. I want you to be my everywhere.
Richard.